She thought she could have a black man removed from first class with just a few carefully chosen words until he calmly reached into his pocket and flashed his FBI badge. Patricia Langford strolled through Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport, her designer carry-on gliding smoothly behind her. She had taken this flight route countless times before. Dallas to Washington, D.C. first class, the only way she ever traveled. Everything about air travel felt predictable to her: the priority boarding, the complimentary champagne, the hushed conversations between professionals. She expected comfort and exclusivity. So when she approached her row and saw a black man in a crisp navy blue suit already seated beside her, her steps faltered. He had an air of quiet confidence, his laptop open, eyes scanning the screen as if he were reviewing something important. Patricia's lips pressed together. She set her designer tote down with a little too much force and took her seat, barely masking her displeasure. First class wasn't supposed to be like this. The man beside her, Daniel Stokes, barely acknowledged her. He was focused, typing effortlessly, absorbed in his work. The glow from his laptop reflected against his dark skin, highlighting the sharp angles of his face. He had the composure of someone who belonged here. Patricia, however, wasn't convinced. She inhaled sharply through her nose, shifting in her seat. Her purse accidentally nudged his armrest. No reaction. She sat up straighter, glancing around as if expecting a flight attendant to notice this mistake. Then she took it a step further. She leaned slightly toward him, just enough to make her presence known. "Excuse me," she said, her voice carefully polite. "Are you sure you're in the right seat?" Daniel didn't even look up. "Yes." That was it. No elaboration. No explanation. She cleared her throat, glancing around again. This time, she caught the eye of a flight attendant, Emily Jacobs, a young woman in her early 30s who had been assisting passengers a few rows ahead. Patricia lifted her hand slightly, signaling Emily over. Daniel sighed, subtle but noticeable. Emily approached with her usual professional smile. "Is everything all right, ma'am?" Patricia forced a small chuckle, shaking her head as if she found the situation amusing. "I think there's been a little mix-up. I believe this gentleman is in the wrong seat." Emily glanced at Daniel, who finally paused his typing and looked up. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes. Not surprise. Not confusion. Something else. Emily pulled out the passenger manifest from her tablet, quickly scanning the seat assignments. "Actually, Mr. Stokes is in his correct seat," she said politely. "Your ticket says 2A, and he's in 2B. Patricia blinked, her fingers tightening around the edge of her armrest. "That's odd," she said, forcing a laugh. "Are you sure?" I just assumed." Emily smiled, already sensing where this was going. "I'm sure, ma'am. Everything looks correct." Patricia's face twitched. Her carefully controlled expression wavered for a fraction of a second before she smoothed it over with a tight-lipped smile. "Well," she exhaled, "I suppose mistakes happen." She turned back toward the window, but she wasn't done. Not even close. Daniel, meanwhile, had already gone back to work. Emily hesitated for a second, sensing the tension, then gave Daniel a quick nod before stepping away. But Patricia was stewing. Her fingers tapped against her knee. Her breath was shallow, eyes darting toward the flight crew, then back to Daniel. He wasn't reacting. He wasn't explaining himself or offering any reassurances. He wasn't playing into the little game she had expected him to play. That made her angrier. She wasn't the kind of woman to let things slide. She pressed the call button. A soft chime sounded overhead, and Emily Jacobs reappeared a few moments later, her smile the same as before, professional and warm. "Ma'am, is there something I can help you with?" Patricia kept her voice low, her tone carefully measured. "I'd like to request a seat change." Emily blinked. "Oh, are you uncomfortable? Is there an issue with the seat itself?" Patricia hesitated for half a second. She couldn't just say what she was really thinking. Instead, she tilted her head toward Daniel, lowering her voice even further. I don't feel comfortable sitting here," she said, her words slow, deliberate. Emily's smile faltered. I'm sorry to hear that, ma'am. If there's a technical issue with the seat, I'd be happy to. No, it's not the seat, Patricia interrupted. She exhaled sharply. I just prefer to sit elsewhere. Emily glanced at Daniel, who had paused his typing again but hadn't said a word. He was listening. Waiting. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, his jaw tight. Let me check if there are any open seats, Emily said, tapping her tablet. Just a moment. Patricia sat back, lips pressed into a firm line. Daniel didn't react. He didn't argue, didn't acknowledge her, didn't ask her why she was uncomfortable. That only infuriated her more. A few rows ahead, a man in a blazer turned his head slightly, pretending to check his phone but clearly listening. Across the aisle, a woman nudged her husband. People were noticing. Emily's fingers moved quickly over the screen. I'm afraid we're at full capacity today, ma'am. There aren't any open first-class seats available. Patricia's stomach clenched. Emily smiled apologetically. Would you like me to check an economy? There might be a seat available there. Patricia's face burned. Economy? As if she would ever, her voice caught in her throat. That's not going to work. Emily's smile didn't waver. In that case, I hope you don't mind staying in your assigned seat. Patricia forced a thin-lipped smile. I suppose I have no choice. Emily nodded. Let me know if you need anything else. She walked away, but Patricia barely noticed. Her ears were ringing. Daniel, still silent, turned back to his laptop and resumed typing. That was it. That was his response. He was just going to pretend she didn't exist. Her fingers curled into fists. This wasn't over. She exhaled sharply and pressed the call button again. This time, Emily hesitated before coming back. Ma'am? Patricia sat up straighter. I need to speak to someone in charge. Emily's face remained neutral. I'm the lead flight attendant on this flight. Is there something I can clarify for you? Patricia's voice sharpened. I need to speak to the head crew member. Or the pilot. A murmur spread through the cabin. Someone let out a quiet chuckle. Emily's expression remained professional, but her patience was clearly thinning. Ma'am, the pilot is preparing for takeoff and won't be available, but I'm happy to assist you. Patricia pursed her lips, her jaw tightening. Daniel wasn't reacting. He wasn't nervous. Wasn't shifting in discomfort. It was like he had done this dance before. She lowered her voice again. I don't feel safe. That changed everything. Emily's smile dropped. Her body stiffened. Daniel stopped typing. Across the aisle, a middle-aged man wearing a Bluetooth earpiece muttered, "Here we go again." Emily straightened up. I'm sorry, ma'am, but can you clarify what you mean? Patricia folded her hands neatly in her lap, tilting her head slightly. I just don't feel comfortable. She hesitated just long enough to imply something without saying it outright. I don't want to be difficult, but I think it would be best if someone else took the seat. Daniel closed his laptop. This time, he looked her directly in the eye. And for the first time, Patricia felt a flicker of uncertainty. Patricia held Daniel's gaze, but for the first time, she felt a flicker of uncertainty. He wasn't defensive. He wasn't angry. He was just watching her, unreadable, waiting. A hush settled over the cabin. The weight of Patricia's words hung in the air. I don't feel safe. It wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. It was carefully chosen, designed to trigger a response. Emily, still standing beside her, didn't move right away. Her posture stiffened, and her eyes darted toward Daniel, who had now fully closed his laptop, hands resting on top of it. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't frowning. He just stared at Patricia, studying her. Patricia didn't waver. Not yet. Emily exhaled slowly. Ma'am, she said carefully, are you saying you feel threatened? Patricia tilted her head slightly, giving the smallest shrug. I'm not saying that. I just don't feel comfortable, that's all. Across the aisle, the businessman with the Bluetooth scoffed and muttered, unbelievable. A young woman 3 rows back lifted her phone slightly, pretending to text but clearly recording. A few other passengers whispered among themselves, heads turning in Patricia's direction. Patricia noticed. She could feel the shift. The tide was turning against her. But she wasn't about to back down. "This is a simple request," she continued, feigning politeness. "I'm just asking to be accommodated. If I'm uncomfortable, I should have the right to move seats, shouldn't I?" Emily's jaw tightened. "Ma'am, I already checked, and there are no open first-class seats available." Patricia pressed her lips together. "And coach?" Emily hesitated. "There are 2 open seats in economy." Patricia straightened. "Perfect. He can take one of them." A low ripple of murmurs spread through the cabin. Daniel inhaled deeply, his fingers drumming once on the surface of his laptop before going still. He wasn't arguing, wasn't responding, but he also wasn't moving. Emily blinked, as if replaying Patricia's words in her mind to make sure she had heard correctly. "Ma'am," her voice was lower now, firmer. "Just to clarify, you want me to move this passenger to economy because you don't want to sit next to him?" Patricia nodded once, sitting straighter. "Yes." Emily inhaled through her nose. "That won't be happening." Patricia's eyes snapped up. "Excuse me?" Emily folded her hands in front of her, voice unwavering. "Mr. Stokes has a first-class ticket, just like you. He is in his assigned seat. I cannot and will not ask him to move." Patricia's face flushed. She was losing control of the situation. Passengers were staring openly now, some whispering, some shaking their heads. The young woman with the phone was still recording. Patricia felt her stomach twist. "This is ridiculous," she hissed. "I am simply asking for the same courtesy that would be extended to anyone else who feels uncomfortable." Emily didn't budge. "You're asking me to remove a paying passenger from his assigned first-class seat and relocate him to economy for no valid reason. That is not an accommodation. That is discrimination." A sharp silence followed. Someone let out a low whistle. Daniel hadn't moved, hadn't said a word. He just watched Patricia, waiting. Patricia's pulse pounded in her ears. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Emily squared her shoulders. "Ma'am, we're about to taxi. If you cannot remain seated and follow flight crew instructions, I will have to ask you to deplane." Patricia's stomach dropped. "What?" Emily's tone remained professional but firm. "You have 2 options. Stay in your seat quietly, or you can deplane." "But Mr. Stokes is not moving." A few passengers clapped softly. Patricia felt humiliation rise in her chest. This wasn't how things were supposed to work. She wasn't supposed to be the one getting reprimanded. She opened her mouth, ready to argue, but before she could, Daniel reached into his pocket. He pulled out a leather case, flipped it open, and held it up. And just like that, everything changed. A gold FBI badge gleamed under the cabin lights. The air in the plane shifted. Patricia's entire body went rigid. Passengers gasped. A few even chuckled. The young woman recording zoomed in immediately. Daniel's voice was calm, even unreadable. "Ma'am," he said smoothly, tilting his head, "would you like to file an official complaint?" "I can take your statement right now." Patricia's breath hitched. She couldn't speak. Daniel didn't move, didn't blink. He just waited. And for the first time, Patricia felt truly trapped. The silence in the cabin was thick, stretching uncomfortably between Patricia and Daniel. His FBI badge glinted under the overhead lights, the gold emblem unmistakable. It was the kind of thing you couldn't unsee, the kind of revelation that shifted the entire room. Passengers who had been whispering moments ago were now staring openly, some smirking, others wide-eyed. Patricia's mouth went dry. Her brain scrambled for an explanation, an excuse, a way out. This wasn't supposed to happen. The man she had tried to have removed from the plane, the man she implied was a threat, was federal law enforcement. Her throat tightened. Daniel's expression hadn't changed. He wasn't smiling or gloating. He just sat there, badge in one hand, eyes locked onto hers, waiting. His voice was steady, level, unreadable. "Would you like to file an official complaint, ma'am?" The words hung in the air like a loaded gun. Patricia's body felt frozen, heat creeping up her neck. She tried to speak, but all that came out was a faint, strangled I. Daniel tilted his head slightly. "You said you felt uncomfortable," he continued, tone polite but sharp. That's a serious allegation on a federal flight. If you believe I've done something inappropriate, I'd be happy to take your statement. Patricia's stomach dropped. She could feel it happening. The shift. Moments ago, she had controlled the narrative. She had expected sympathy, expected someone, anyone, to take her side. But now, she was the one under scrutiny. A man too rose ahead, let out a low chuckle. "Oh, this is priceless," he muttered, shaking his head. The young woman recording zoomed in on Patricia's face. Emily, the flight attendant, stood nearby, arms crossed, her face carefully neutral. But there was something in her eyes, a silent understanding, a quiet expectation. She was waiting. Everyone was waiting. Patricia's breath came fast and shallow. She couldn't admit she had lied. She couldn't say she had made it all up just to get rid of him. But if she doubled down, if she pushed forward with her claim, she would be accusing a federal agent of being a danger on a flight. And that would come with consequences. Her hands trembled in her lap. Daniel hadn't looked away. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Patricia shook her head, barely a movement. "No," she croaked. No complaint. Daniel nodded once, as if he had expected that. Slowly, he closed his badge, tucked it back into his jacket, and reopened his laptop. Just like that, it was over. At least for him. For Patricia, the nightmare was just beginning. A few passengers murmured their approval. A couple even clapped softly. The businessman across the aisle smirked and went back to his newspaper. The young woman with the phone, she was already typing. Patricia could feel her heart pounding. She wanted to melt into her seat, to disappear, to go back in time and undo the last 10 minutes. But there was no undoing this. She had embarrassed herself publicly. She had been exposed. And worse, people had seen it. Recorded it. Her eyes darted around the cabin, searching for an ally, someone who might offer a sympathetic look. No one did. Even Emily, the one person who had been patient with her, had lost the warmth in her expression. Patricia swallowed hard. She wanted to argue, wanted to say something to regain control. But she knew, deep down, there was nothing left to say. The flight wasn't even off the ground yet. And somehow, she had already lost. Patricia sat rigidly in her seat, staring straight ahead. Her breathing was shallow, her face burning. This wasn't just embarrassment. This was humiliation. Daniel had already moved on. He had flipped his laptop open again, fingers tapping calmly on the keyboard. It was as if she didn't exist. The rest of the cabin, however, hadn't forgotten. Across the aisle, the businessman with the Bluetooth smirked to himself. The woman recording had stopped typing, but her phone was still angled slightly upward, as if waiting for Patricia to react. Even the flight attendants, the ones who were supposed to be neutral, had a different air about them now. Emily, the lead flight attendant, stood nearby watching. Patricia felt it all. The weight of the stares. The quiet judgment in the air. She had miscalculated. Badly. Her fingers twitched in her lap, her heart hammering. This wasn't just some minor misunderstanding she could smooth over with a forced laugh and a dismissive wave. She had tried to have an FBI agent removed from his seat. On camera. The implications were settling in now, heavy in her chest. Her mouth was dry. Emily finally stepped closer, her tone still polite, but no longer soft. "Ma'am," she said, keeping her voice low, "I need to confirm that you are okay to remain on this flight without further disruption." Patricia stiffened. A handful of passengers glanced over, pretending not to eavesdrop but absolutely listening. She wanted to snap, wanted to demand why she was the one being treated like the problem when all she had done was express discomfort. But Daniel's badge had changed everything. She was trapped now. The power she thought she had was gone. She forced her lips into what she hoped was a calm expression. "I'm fine." Emily's gaze lingered. Then, slowly, she nodded. "I'm going to hold you to that." Then she turned and walked away. Patricia exhaled shakily, clenching her hands together in her lap. It was over. At least, that's what she thought. A sharp chime broke the silence. She looked up just as the young woman with the phone smirked at her screen and tapped twice. Patricia's stomach clenched. She knew that look. She had seen it on her own grandchildren's faces when they shared something online, something meant to spread fast. Her fingers tightened around the armrest. She turned slightly, heart pounding, and stole a glance at the woman's screen. The video was already uploaded. Patricia felt like the air had been knocked from her lungs. The caption was simple. Racist woman tries to remove black man from first class, then learns he's FBI. Patricia's hands went cold. The flight wasn't even in the air yet. And somehow, she had already lost. And if it was already online, that meant there was no stopping what came next. She turned her head forward again, trying to steady her breathing, trying to convince herself that maybe it wouldn't be so bad. Maybe no one would care. Maybe it wouldn't spread. Maybe. Her phone vibrated in her purse. Once. Twice. A third time. Patricia's chest tightened. She didn't want to look. She didn't want to know. But her hands moved on their own, digging into her bag, fingers wrapping around the device. She pulled it out, and her stomach dropped. Text messages. From acquaintances. From family. From people she hadn't heard from in months. Each one was a variation of the same question. Patricia, is this you? Just saw a video. Tell me this isn't real. Oh my God, what did you do? Her heartbeat roared in her ears. She swiped open her browser with trembling hands and tapped on Twitter. It took less than a second. Her name was already trending. The video had been uploaded less than 5 minutes ago, and yet it had already been viewed over 20,000 times. And the comments. They were pouring in. Karma is real. This lady really thought she could get away with it. Hope she enjoys the internet roasting she's about to get. Patricia's breath hitched. Her world wasn't just collapsing. It was burning. And for the first time, Patricia realized there was no coming back from this. She practically bolted off the plane the second the doors opened. She ignored the side glances, the quiet chuckles, the unspoken judgment hanging in the air. She just needed to get out. But as she hurried into Reagan National Airport, her pulse skipped at what she saw waiting near baggage claim. A cluster of reporters. Not a huge crowd. Not yet. But enough. A woman in a navy blazer held a microphone near her lips, reading from her phone as a cameraman filmed her. The now viral video shows an unidentified woman attempting to have an FBI agent removed from first class, citing discomfort. The clip has gained over 1 million views in just a few hours. Patricia stopped breathing. 1 million. That was impossible. She turned her head quickly, praying they hadn't seen her. But one of the reporters locked eyes with her. The woman's face lit up. Wait. That's her. Patricia spun on her heel, panic spiking in her chest. She could not be seen like this. She moved fast, her heels clicking sharply against the tile floor. She needed to get to the exit. Now, her phone buzzed violently in her purse. Texts. Missed calls. Alerts. She couldn't outrun it. She shoved past a group of travelers, her breath short, her hands clammy. She barely made it to the curb before her name was shouted behind her. Miss Langford, do you have a response to the video? She winced. She hadn't even realized her name had been released yet. A taxi slowed near the curb, and she nearly threw herself into the back seat. Go, she snapped at the driver. Now. He raised an eyebrow, but pulled away from the curb without a word. Patricia pressed her hands to her temples, eyes squeezed shut. 1 million views. Her stomach churned. She had built her whole life on careful reputation management. A good image. A respected name. And in a single afternoon, it was gone. Her phone vibrated again. This time, it was a number she didn't recognize. She stared at it, heart hammering. Then, just before it went to voicemail, she swiped to answer. Hello? A brief silence. Then, a clipped voice. Miss Langford, this is James Rollins, chair of the Marston Foundation. I assume you're aware of the situation. Patricia's mouth went dry. She had been on the Marston Foundation board for years. A charity that prided itself on its progressive image, inclusivity, and ethical leadership. And she already knew what this call was about. She swallowed. James, we're going to need you to step down. He interrupted immediately. Patricia stared blankly ahead. It wasn't a request. It was an order. Her pulse drummed in her ears. But this is being taken out of context. The board disagrees. His voice was flat. Final. We'll issue a public statement by morning. We expect your resignation by then. A sharp beep. He had hung up. Patricia lowered the phone slowly. Her career was over. Her reputation was gone. And the worst part? No one cared about her explanation. They had seen the video. And the video was enough. She let out a shaky breath. This wasn't something she could control. This was something she had done to herself. And now, she had to live with it. Meanwhile, Daniel Stokes hadn't even spared her another thought. By now, he was probably in a meeting. Completely unbothered. His life untouched. Because for him, this had been just another Tuesday. Patricia sat frozen in the back of the taxi, her fingers tightening around her phone. Her reputation, her career, her carefully curated image, destroyed in mere hours. She had spent decades ensuring she was seen as a respectable, high-society woman, the type who sat on charity boards, attended exclusive galas, and maintained the perfect social connections. Now, she was nothing more than a viral spectacle. She glanced at the screen again, the number of views ticking higher by the second. The comments were relentless. This is what privilege looks like. Thought she could pull the usual nonsense and got humbled instantly. She tried to ruin that man's life. Now hers is over. Poetic justice. The way she crumbled when she saw the badge? Delicious. Her pulse pounded in her ears as she scrolled faster, looking for anything, any shred of support. There was none. Her acquaintances, her colleagues, the people she had once considered allies, silent. She checked her messages. Some were from friends, but they weren't offering comfort. Patricia, what the hell were you thinking? Tell me this isn't true. They're calling for you to resign. Have you spoken to James? She already had her answer. Her resignation wasn't optional. The Marston Foundation was just the beginning. She knew the other organizations she was affiliated with would be reaching out soon, distancing themselves as quickly as possible. No one wanted to be associated with this kind of scandal. Her hands trembled as she clicked on her email. Sure enough, there were messages from other boards and committees. Dear Patricia, in light of recent events, we regret to inform you that your position with. She didn't even finish reading. She already knew what they all said. She was being erased. She swallowed the lump in her throat and forced herself to think. Damage control. She had been in PR long enough to know the steps. She needed to issue a statement, take control of the narrative before it spiraled further. Maybe she could frame it as a misunderstanding, say she was having an off day, issue an apology, and move on. But even as she tried to convince herself of that plan, she knew it was useless. This wasn't just some minor controversy that would be forgotten in a week. This was a public reckoning. The taxi pulled up to her townhouse, and Patricia all but stumbled out. She hurried inside, locking the door behind her, her breath shaky. She needed to think. She needed a plan. She turned on the TV, desperate to distract herself, but the news was already covering it. The video now has over 3 million views in just under 6 hours. Experts say this is yet another example of individuals weaponizing discomfort against Black people in public spaces, a phenomenon that has led to real-world consequences, from wrongful arrests to even violence. Social media is already calling for accountability, with many demanding that Patricia Langford step down from all leadership positions and issue a public apology. She snatched up the remote and turned it off. Her breathing was shallow. She had been in the news before, always for something good. A philanthropic event, a new charity project, an award for her contributions to the community. Now, she was the villain in a national story. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was her son, Andrew. She hesitated before answering. Andrew, what the hell did you do? His voice was low, furious. Patricia winced. This is being blown out of proportion. I was uncomfortable, and I simply asked to move seats. You tried to get an FBI agent kicked out of first class because you didn't like sitting next to a Black man. His voice was dripping with disbelief. Mom, do you have any idea how bad this looks? I didn't know he was FBI, she snapped, defensive. That doesn't matter. You made an assumption, and now the entire internet is watching you get what you deserve. Patricia swallowed hard. Andrew, please. You have to understand. No, you have to understand. This isn't something you just apologize for and move on. This is your reputation. Your legacy. And you just set it on fire. His words hit her harder than she expected. Are you going to help me or not? She asked, voice trembling. A long silence stretched between them. Finally, Andrew exhaled sharply. I don't think I can. Her stomach twisted. Andrew, I have my own career, my own reputation to protect. And right now, being associated with you? That's not something I can afford. It felt like a slap. Before she could say anything, he continued. I suggest you get off social media, don't do any interviews, and stay out of the public eye. And for the love of God, don't try to justify what you did. It'll only make it worse. Then he hung up. Patricia stood there, the weight of his words settling over her like a suffocating blanket. Even her own son wanted nothing to do with her. She sank into the nearest chair, gripping her head. This wasn't how her life was supposed to go. She was supposed to be respected, admired, someone who was remembered for her generosity, her influence. But now her name would only be synonymous with disgrace. The next morning, it was even worse. She barely slept, haunted by the endless stream of messages, the notifications that wouldn't stop. She had thought that maybe, just maybe, the outrage would die down overnight. It hadn't. It had gotten worse. The video was on every major news network. Social media had exploded with think pieces, discussions, and condemnation. People had found her LinkedIn, her old interviews, her charity work. They were picking apart everything, looking for more reasons to tear her down. Her inbox was flooded. Her phone rang nonstop. Even stepping outside felt impossible. By noon, reporters were outside her townhouse. She peeked through the blinds, stomach twisting. Cameras, microphones. They were waiting for her to say something, anything. She stepped back, shaking. She was a prisoner in her own home. Hours passed. She ignored the calls, the texts, the knocking at her door. And then, at exactly 3:12 p.m., an alert popped up on her phone. The Marston Foundation issues a statement. We do not condone discrimination of any kind. In light of recent events, Patricia Langford has resigned from her position, effective immediately. Her hands trembled. It was official. They had cut her loose. She dropped her phone onto the table, staring blankly ahead. Everything she had built, everything she had worked for, gone. All because of one moment. One assumption. One mistake. She had thought she could control the situation. That she could play the game the way she always had. She had been wrong. For the next few weeks, Patricia barely left her house. She avoided the news, avoided social media. But it didn't matter. The world had moved on without her. Her name was still attached to the scandal, but people had shifted their focus to the next controversy, the next viral story. That was almost worse. She wasn't relevant anymore, not in the way she had once been. She wasn't admired, wasn't feared. She was forgotten. And there was no coming back from that. Meanwhile, Daniel Stokes hadn't given her another thought. He was back in Washington, back at work, his life completely untouched by the chaos she had brought upon herself. Because at the end of the day, she was just another person who had tried and failed to use the system against him. For him, this had been just another flight. For her, it had been the end. Patricia sat in silence, staring at the walls of her townhouse, the once comforting space now suffocating. Every sound outside made her flinch. Every ring of her phone sent a wave of anxiety through her body. The reporters had mostly left after a few days, realizing she wasn't going to come outside, but the damage was done. She had never felt so isolated. The friends who used to call her for lunch dates or charity events had vanished. The invitations to social gatherings had stopped. She had become untouchable. She tried watching television, but every channel seemed to remind her of what had happened. If it wasn't direct coverage of the incident, it was some discussion about racism, privilege, and the consequences of social media exposure. She shut it off. The silence was worse, but at least it didn't remind her of the life she had lost. Her son had stopped answering her calls. She had tried leaving messages, but they went unanswered. She could tell from his last conversation that he was done with her, at least for now. Maybe forever. The thought made her chest tighten, but she couldn't bring herself to be angry at him. He was right. She had done this to herself. She still hadn't issued an apology. She had drafted several versions, reading them over and over, but every time she tried to post, she hesitated. It wouldn't matter. No one would believe her. No one would accept it. The moment had passed, and any apology now would be seen as desperate. Her name still trended every few days, though the initial outrage had started to fade. But her presence on the internet was permanently altered. She typed her own name into the search bar one evening, stomach twisting as she watched the results appear. Article after article. Patricia Langford, a cautionary tale of privilege and public backlash. How a first-class passenger's complaint led to her social and professional collapse. Her photo was everywhere. The stills from the video, the moment she had pressed the call button, the stunned look on her face when Daniel had shown his badge. A moment frozen in time, a mistake that would follow her forever. She scrolled to the comment sections. Has anyone checked on her? Is she still hiding? I bet she still doesn't think she did anything wrong. Funny how people like her think they're invincible until reality smacks them in the face. She shut the laptop abruptly. Weeks turned into months. She thought about moving. Selling the townhouse, starting over somewhere new, but where would she go? This wasn't the kind of thing that people forgot. She had lived her life among the elite, but now she was a pariah. The mail piled up. Bills, legal documents, a formal request from another board to confirm her resignation. She didn't even open most of them. There was nothing in those envelopes that would change anything. One afternoon, she finally ventured outside. Just for a walk, just to get some air. She kept her sunglasses on, pulled her coat tight around her. She wasn't sure if people would recognize her, but she felt their eyes on her anyway. Maybe it was paranoia. Maybe it was real. She stopped by a small cafe, hoping to blend in. She stood in line, avoiding eye contact, listening to the hum of conversation around her. Then she heard it. A whisper. That's her. Her stomach dropped. She didn't turn around, but she could feel it. The recognition. The judgment. She grabbed her coffee and hurried out, heart pounding, the familiar panic settling in again. Back home, she locked the door behind her and sank into a chair. She wasn't sure what she had expected. Life couldn't go back to normal. It never would. She had spent her entire life believing she was someone important, someone respected, but none of it had mattered in the end. The people who had once praised her, invited her to events, shook her hand and smiled in her presence, they had abandoned her the moment she became inconvenient. She wondered if Daniel Stokes ever thought about her. Probably not. To him, she was just another person who had tried and failed to put him in his place. A fleeting inconvenience in his life. He had continued his work, continued his routine, while hers had shattered completely. The world had moved on. But for Patricia, there was nowhere left to go. Patricia spent the next few weeks in a daze, moving through her days without purpose. She avoided social media, but it didn't matter. The internet had branded her permanently. Her name would always be linked to that video, that moment, that mistake. She was no longer Patricia Langford, respected socialite and philanthropist. She was Patricia Langford, the woman who had tried to have a black man removed from first class and failed spectacularly. Her house felt smaller now, suffocating. Every corner of it reminded her of the life she had before, the one that no longer existed. The invitations had stopped arriving. The people she once considered friends were nowhere to be found. She thought about reaching out, but what could she say? They had already made their stance clear. She was untouchable. She tried to distract herself by cleaning, organizing, doing anything to keep her mind occupied. But no matter what she did, the weight of what had happened pressed down on her. The shame clung to her skin, a constant, gnawing presence she couldn't shake. One evening, she finally turned the TV back on, flipping through channels aimlessly. She paused when she saw a news segment discussing public figures who had faced backlash and lost everything. Her breath caught in her throat when her own face appeared on the screen. They were talking about her. Patricia Langford's case is a prime example of how quickly the public holds individuals accountable for their actions, the anchor was saying. Though she has issued no formal apology, the impact of her actions has led to the loss of her professional affiliations, board memberships, and her once flourishing reputation. Her hands clenched into fists. They spoke about her as if she were a lesson, a warning to others. She wasn't a person anymore. She was a symbol of failure, of disgrace. She shut the TV off. Days passed in a blur. She hardly ate. She barely slept. The thought of facing the outside world again made her stomach turn. Then came the letter. It arrived in a plain white envelope with no return address. She hesitated before opening it, her fingers trembling slightly. Inside was a short, typed message. "You deserve everything that's happening to you." Her breath caught. She stared at the words, rereading them over and over. She had received angry messages before, on social media, through email, but this was different. This was real. Someone had taken the time to send this to her directly. She glanced toward the window, heart pounding. Was someone watching her? Waiting to see her reaction? She crumpled the letter in her fist and tossed it onto the table. Her mind raced. Would this ever stop? Would she always be looking over her shoulder, wondering if someone would recognize her, if someone would say something, send something? She knew the answer. This wasn't going away. She was trapped in a life she no longer recognized, surrounded by walls that once felt like home but now felt like a prison. She had spent years believing she was important, untouchable. But in the end, the world had moved on without her. And she had no one to blame but herself. Patricia barely left her house anymore. The days blurred together, each one feeling emptier than the last. The walls of her townhouse, once a place of comfort, felt like they were closing in on her. She spent her mornings staring at the unopened emails piling up in her inbox, messages from former colleagues, all carefully phrased, all with the same meaning. They were distancing themselves from her. No one wanted to be associated with her name. Her phone had stopped ringing. At first, she had been relieved. The flood of angry calls and texts had been overwhelming, but now the silence was worse. Even the reporters had stopped waiting outside. There was no more scandal to cover. No more outrage to fuel. The world had moved on. But for Patricia, time had stopped. She tried going to the grocery store once, thinking maybe things had settled enough that no one would recognize her. She pulled on a scarf, oversized sunglasses, hoping to blend in. She kept her head down as she walked through the aisles, moving quickly, avoiding eye contact. It didn't work. At the checkout line, she felt it, the shift in the air, the murmurs. She turned slightly and saw a woman a few feet away holding her phone up, recording. Patricia's stomach dropped. She could already imagine the caption. "Guess who I just saw?" Patricia Langford, looking rough these days. She abandoned her cart and walked out of the store without looking back. She wasn't sure what was worse, being hated or being pitied. She stopped watching the news. It was too painful. Every now and then, she would hear her name mentioned in passing, but the attention was dwindling. She was old news. Forgotten. Until the lawsuit. The letter arrived unexpectedly, thick and heavy. At first, she thought it was another threat, another reminder of how much people despised her. But when she opened it, her breath caught in her throat. Daniel Stokes was suing her. Her hands shook as she read through the legal jargon, but the message was clear. Defamation. Harassment. Endangerment. He had every right. She had implied he was a threat. On a flight. In front of witnesses. She had tried to have him removed from his seat, knowing exactly what that accusation could have led to. And now he was holding her accountable. She called the one person she still thought might help her lawyer, Philip. He answered on the second ring. "Patricia." His tone was clipped, professional, but colder than she remembered. "I assume you got the letter." "What do I do?" she asked, her voice trembling. A pause. "Settle." Her stomach twisted. "What?" "Settle, Patricia. There's no way you win this in court. You'll be shredded in front of a jury. Your best option is to negotiate a quiet settlement and hope it doesn't make the news." Hope. Patricia nearly laughed at that. There was no hope for her anymore. "How much?" she asked numbly. Philip hesitated. "A lot." She closed her eyes. She had money, but not as much as she once did. Her board positions had come with hefty paychecks. Losing them had already taken a toll. "Now this?" "Do it," she whispered. "Settle." Weeks passed, filled with meetings and negotiations, each one stripping her of more than just money. By the end of it, she had lost nearly everything. The final settlement amount was staggering. She sold one of her properties just to cover it. But even that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the finality of it. There was no coming back from this. The scandal had ruined her reputation, but the lawsuit had destroyed any last shred of dignity she had left. One evening, she sat at her kitchen table, staring at a glass of wine she hadn't touched. She used to love entertaining, hosting lavish dinners, being the center of attention. Now, she sat alone in silence, her reflection in the window barely recognizable. She reached for her phone, scrolling through her contacts. So many names. So many people she used to know. She hesitated over Andrew's name. Her son hadn't called in months. The last time they had spoken, he had made it clear he didn't want to be associated with her. But she was his mother. Surely, that still meant something. Her fingers hovered over the call button. Then, she set the phone down. There was nothing left to say. She had spent her life believing she was someone important, someone who mattered. But in the end, the world had moved on without her. And she was utterly, completely alone. The loneliness was unbearable. Days stretched into weeks, and Patricia barely left her house. She had once been a woman with a packed schedule, her days filled with meetings, charity events, and exclusive gatherings. Now, she had nothing. No one was calling. No invitations arrived. Even the anger from the public had faded. The world had moved on, leaving her in the wreckage of her own downfall. She thought about reaching out to old friends, but what would she say? She had already seen how quickly they had distanced themselves. People she had once considered close hadn't defended her, hadn't checked on her. It was clear they wanted nothing to do with her. Even those who might have sympathized wouldn't risk their own reputations by being associated with her. She spent hours online, searching her own name, watching how her legacy had been rewritten. Before, she had been respected, admired. Now, her name was a punchline. Patricia Langford, proof that karma is real. Where is she now? The disgraced socialite who thought she was untouchable. Every article, every comment, every joke chipped away at her. She had once held power, and now she was powerless. The money was running out faster than she had expected. The lawsuit had taken a huge portion of her savings. Without her board positions, without her high-profile connections, there was no steady income. She had lived a life of luxury for so long that she had never imagined a future where money might become an issue. But now, it was a very real problem. She looked around her townhouse, knowing she couldn't keep it forever. The maintenance, the property taxes, the bills, it was all too much. She could sell it, but then what? Where would she go? She wasn't just losing her home. She was losing the last piece of the life she had built. One evening, she forced herself to go outside. She told herself she needed fresh air, but deep down, she wanted to see if people still recognized her, if they still cared. She walked through the city, past cafes and boutiques she used to frequent. No one approached her. No reporters, no angry stares. A few people glanced at her, their expressions unreadable, but that was it. It was almost worse than being hated. She had gone from someone everyone wanted to know to someone no one even acknowledged. She stopped by a coffee shop, the kind she never would have set foot in before, too small, too ordinary. She ordered a coffee and sat by the window, watching people pass by. No one paid her any mind. She scrolled through her phone, her fingers hesitating over Andrew's name again. She had thought, hoped, that after time had passed, he might soften, that he might reach out. He hadn't. She considered calling him but stopped herself. If he wanted to talk to her, he would have. She was alone. And she had to accept that. Over the next few months, she started selling things. First, the designer handbags and jewelry. Then, the expensive furniture, the artwork she had once been so proud of. She told herself it was practical, that she didn't need these things anymore. But with every item that left, she felt another piece of herself disappear. Then came the decision she had been dreading, selling the townhouse. It was the last thing she had left from her old life, the final reminder of the woman she used to be. But she couldn't afford it anymore. And there was no point in holding on to something that no longer felt like home. The sale went through faster than she expected. She packed her things alone, no friends to help, no one to say goodbye. She moved into a small apartment in a part of town she never would have considered before. It was quiet, unremarkable. No one knew her there. And that was the point. She thought she would feel relief when she left the townhouse for the last time. Instead, all she felt was emptiness. She tried to fill her days with distractions, reading, walking, anything to keep her mind from dwelling on the past. But the silence was suffocating. One night, she sat in the dark, a single lamp casting a dim glow over the room. She picked up her phone, scrolling through old photos, old messages. Images of parties, events, smiling faces. People who had once cared, or at least pretended to. She opened her messages and typed out a simple text to Andrew. "I know you don't want to talk to me. I understand. But I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything." She stared at the screen for a long time before pressing send. Hours passed. No response. She set the phone down, exhaling slowly. Maybe he would never forgive her. Maybe she didn't deserve forgiveness. She had spent her whole life thinking she was better than others. That she was untouchable. That she could say and do whatever she wanted without consequence. She had been wrong. Now she had nothing. No power. No influence. No friends. Just herself. And the knowledge that she had done this to herself. Weeks passed, and Patricia settled into a routine, though it hardly felt like living. She woke up late, made coffee she barely drank, and spent hours staring at the walls of her small apartment. She rarely went out unless necessary. The fear of recognition still lingered, even though fewer and fewer people seemed to care. The world had moved on, but she hadn't. She checked her phone obsessively, hoping for a response from Andrew. Nothing. She reread her message countless times, debating whether to send another, but she knew it wouldn't make a difference. He had made his decision. She had lost him. The loneliness was unbearable. In her old life, she had been surrounded by people. Now, days went by without a single conversation. The silence stretched endlessly, weighing her down. She thought about reaching out to old friends, but what would she say? No one had called to check on her. They had seen what had happened to her and decided she wasn't worth saving. One day, she forced herself outside, walking through the city without a real destination. She passed stores and restaurants she used to frequent, but they felt foreign now, as if they belonged to someone else. She ended up at a park, sitting on a bench and watching people go about their lives. A group of women sat nearby, laughing and chatting. They reminded her of the people she used to spend time with, the social circles she had once been at the center of. She had been the one throwing lavish parties, the one people wanted to impress. Now, she was invisible. She felt a bitter pang of regret, but she wasn't even sure what she regretted most, losing her status or realizing how hollow it had been all along. Her money was dwindling faster than she had anticipated. The settlement had taken most of it, and without income, she was burning through what was left. She had sold almost everything of value. Soon, even her modest apartment would be too expensive. One evening, she sat in front of her laptop, staring at a blank document. She had thought about writing a public apology, something to show she had learned from her mistakes, but she knew it wouldn't matter. The internet had already made up its mind about her. No carefully worded statement would change that. She had tried to have a black man removed from his seat because she had assumed he didn't belong there. That wasn't something people forgave. And the truth was, she didn't deserve forgiveness. She closed the laptop and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. She had spent so much of her life trying to control how people saw her, crafting a perfect image. But now, people saw her exactly as she was. And she hated it. One afternoon, she walked past a coffee shop and stopped when she saw her reflection in the window. She looked older, more tired than she ever had before. The confidence, the polished presence she had once carried, it was gone. She was just another person now, no different from anyone else. The thought unsettled her. She had always believed she was special, that she had earned her place in the world. But now, stripped of everything, she saw the truth. She had been given advantages her entire life, advantages she had taken for granted. And when faced with someone who she thought didn't belong in her space, she had tried to use those advantages to push him out. She had believed she was entitled to more, simply because she always had been. She finally understood why people had been so quick to condemn her. It wasn't just about that one moment on the plane. It was about everything she represented. She turned away from the window and kept walking. A few days later, she received an email from a local charity she had once worked with. They were hosting a community event and were looking for volunteers. In the past, she would have attended as a guest, dressed in designer clothes, sipping champagne while discussing donations. Now, they were asking if she wanted to help serve food. She almost deleted the email. But something stopped her. She hesitated, staring at the screen for a long time. Then, slowly, she typed out a response. "I'd like to help." She wasn't sure why she did it. Maybe she was desperate for something to fill her time. Maybe she just wanted to feel useful again. Or maybe, for the first time in her life, she wanted to do something that wasn't about her. Patricia arrived at the charity event early, dressed in plain clothes, no designer labels, no jewelry. She had spent hours debating whether to go, but in the end, she couldn't bring herself to back out. She needed something, anything, to make her feel like a person again. The community center was nothing like the high-profile events she used to attend. There were no cameras, no wealthy donors looking to boost their reputations. Just regular people setting up tables, preparing meals, and organizing supplies for those in need. She felt out of place. For so long, she had only ever seen charity work from a distance, as something to be associated with, a way to appear generous. She had never actually done the work herself. A woman in her 50s, wearing an apron, approached her with a warm but tired smile. "Patricia, right?" She nodded hesitantly. "I'm Maria. We could use some help serving meals if you don't mind." Patricia followed her to the food station, rolling up her sleeves. She didn't know what to expect, but no one treated her differently. No one whispered about her or looked at her like she didn't belong. Here, she wasn't Patricia Langford, disgraced socialite. She was just another volunteer. As the evening went on, she found herself lost in the work. She handed out plates, refilled trays, and listened to people's stories. Many of them had lost everything: jobs, homes, families. They weren't so different from her, except they had never had the privilege she had taken for granted. For the first time in months, she felt a strange sense of peace. At the end of the night, as they cleaned up, Maria sat beside her. "You did good today." Patricia let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "I don't know why I came." Maria smiled knowingly. "Maybe you just needed to." Patricia looked down at her hands, the same hands that had once signed checks at charity galas, now stained with food from hours of serving. It was the most meaningful thing she had done in a long time. She kept coming back. At first, it was just once a week, then twice. No one there cared about her past. They only cared that she showed up. She stopped checking social media, stopped searching for her name online. It didn't matter anymore. One evening, as she packed up after another long shift, her phone buzzed. A message. From Andrew. I saw what you've been doing. I don't know if I'm ready to talk yet, but I just wanted you to know that I see it. She stared at the screen, a lump forming in her throat. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was something. She slipped the phone back into her pocket, exhaling slowly. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel invisible. She wasn't the woman she used to be. She never would be again. And maybe that was okay.